Today's lesson is why viruses cause more illness in winter. Hello, everyone. I'm Mike.
I'm Roger.
And as we're heading to the cold winter months, yes, colds and cold kind of go along, right? Cold's the disease when you're sniffling, when you can't breathe, when you have a headache, when you're coughing a lot. They do seem to sort of come along when there's more cold weather, as in the winter, as it said in our title. So we're going to kind of look at some of the interesting science behind this. I know that some people do experience a summer cold. I had one in August earlier this year, and that's no fun, but it's definitely more common to get colds during the winter time, during the colder months, and there's very interesting reasons why that is the case.
Indeed, and of course we're talking about viruses, which are causing lots of illnesses in the winter, and a virus, of course, is a病毒, as you call it in Chinese. So we're talking about viruses, and they cause more illness in the winter. Why is that? Well, let's try to find out. Let's listen to the first part, and we'll be right back.
Why viruses cause more illness in winter. Winter can offer relief after the hot months of summer. However, it's also the time when the common cold becomes even more common. But why are we more likely to get sick in the winter, and how can we stay healthy?
大家好，标题介绍到名词 virus， 意思是病毒或是病毒感染。例如 Despite efforts to stop its spread, the virus has caused many people to become ill. 尽管努力阻止它的散播，但该病毒已造成许多人生病了。或者 Scientists confirmed that the disease is caused by a virus and not bacteria. 科学家证实这个疾病是由病毒而不是细菌引起的。
All right, let's get into our article. It says, winter can offer relief after the hot months of summer. That is very much true here in Taiwan, where summer can last 6, 7, 8 months from sort of April or May all the way through to October or November. So when the temperatures go down, I should say, and when the weather changes, becomes a little cooler, it can offer relief. Suddenly, I'm not sweating as soon as I go out. I can leave my air conditioner off, wear my favorite sweater or something like that I can't normally wear. So we get some relief. The change from hot weather to cool weather is welcomed by many. However, it says it's also the time when the common cold becomes even more common. Yeah, that is true. Those diseases or sicknesses, those illnesses that we often forget about during the summer, like the cold or the flu or things like that, they become more common during the winter. And yeah, we call this the common cold. It's a good sort of generic term because, of course, colds, they change all the time. That's why there's no medicine that can stop colds that we might get when we're, kids, like we can get medicines to stop certain diseases. Colds are constantly evolving and changing, so it's something that we always have to deal with winter after winter, year after year, but calling it the common cold just means sort of the normal cold, the one that most people can get. It won't affect your health too much, and within a week you'll be feeling better. So this definitely, the common cold, becomes more common during the winter. But the question is, why? Why are we more likely to get sick in the winter? And how can we stay healthy? When you think about it, during the winter, you're at home maybe a little bit more. You're not out with so many people. You might think that might keep you isolated from other sick people, but that's not the case. So what is going on? Why does cold winter weather promote things like common colds? Let's find out in the next paragraph. Many viruses, including rhinoviruses, the main cause of the common cold, and flu viruses, thrive in cold weather, as cooler temperatures allow them to remain infectious for longer and multiply more rapidly. Moreover, winter months tend to be less humid than summer months. In high humidity, the droplets we release when we cough or sneeze are large and fall to the floor quickly. When humidity is low, however, the droplets are smaller and float in the air for longer. Consequently, somebody else is more likely to breathe in those particles and become sick.
第二部分看到动词 thrive 表示茁壮成长。例如 Coral reefs thrive when water temperatures remain stable. 当海水温度维持稳定时，珊瑚礁会茁壮成长。或是 Plants need to get sufficient amounts of sunlight and water in order to thrive. 植物需要获得充足的阳光和水分才能茁壮成长。继续看到 infectious， 它是形容词，表示疾病传染性的。可以说 The lab studies many infectious diseases. 那间实验室研究许多传染性疾病。再看一句 Joe picked up an infectious disease when he visited the United States. Joe 去美国时染上了一个传染病。接下来看到副词 moreover， 它的意思是而且、再者或是此外。例如 The salad is cheaper than the burger. Moreover, it's better for you. 沙拉比汉堡便宜，此外对你比较好。也可以说 Online learning saves time and money. Moreover, it allows students to study at their own pace. 线上学习节省时间和金钱，此外还能让学生依自己的步调学习。下一个看到 humidity， 这个单字是名词，意思是湿度或是潮湿。例如 Taiwan's heat and humidity cause many people to feel uncomfortable during the summer months. 台湾的炎热潮湿让许多人在夏季感到不舒服。再看一个例句 Some plants thrive in environments with constant humidity. 有些植物在有持续湿度的环境中茁壮生长。接着介绍副词 consequently， 表示因此或是所以。我们可以说 I lost my wallet and consequently I don't have money to take a taxi home. 我弄丢了钱包，因此我没钱搭计程车回家。又或者说 Our car broke down on the highway. Consequently, we'll be late for the meeting. 我们的车在快速公路上抛锚了，因此我们将会在会议上迟到。另外补充名词 consequence， C-O-N-S-E-Q-U-E-N-C-E consequence。这个字尤其是指不好或不利的结果或是后果。例如 The new law had an unexpected consequence on small businesses. 这项新法对小型企业有意想不到的影响。或是 After cheating on the test, the students had to face the consequences of their actions. 在考试作弊后，学生们必须面对自己行为的后果。最后介绍名词 particle， 意思是微粒或是粒子。例如 Scientists study how each particle in an atom interacts with others. 科学家研究原子中的每个粒子如何和其他粒子相互作用。再看一个例子 Frank wrote a poem about the particles of dust that float in beams of sunlight. Frank 写了一首诗，描写尘埃微粒漂浮在阳光下的景象。
Okay, so here in the second paragraph, it begins by saying, many viruses, including rhinoviruses, the main cause of the common cold, and flu viruses, thrive in cold weather as cooler temperatures allow them to remain infectious for longer and multiply more rapidly. This is kind of a long sentence, but it basically tells us why these viruses spread so easily in the wintertime. We've got the rhinovirus. I guess there are many different kinds of that, so we say the rhinoviruses, and these cause the common cold. As you said before, there are many different kinds of these viruses, and they're changing all the time. And then we've got flu viruses. I guess the flu, to me, is just like a really bad cold. But, yeah, if you have either one of them, you're going to be sick for a while. It's going to take you a while to recover. Well, these viruses and the flu viruses thrive in cold weather. If you thrive, that means you do very well in a certain kind of situation. So lots of people, of course, thrive when they move to the city. Of course, there are good job opportunities. You can make a lot of money if you move to the city from the countryside. But here, these viruses thrive in cold weather for various reasons.
All right. So that's their happy place where they are doing extremely well and life is good for the viruses, but of course not so good for the people who catch those viruses. And this is because cooler temperatures, I should say, allow them to remain infectious for longer and multiply more rapidly. There you go. So they like the cold, maybe not freezing cold, but certainly cooler temperatures. I think the hot weather of the summer can be a little bit too hot for the viruses, and maybe they can't survive when the temperature is above 30 degrees or something. But when it's down between sort of 10 and 20, that kind of cooler temperature, they do very well. So they remain infectious for longer. If something's infectious, it means it can infect you. If you get that virus in your body, you could catch that disease. During the COVID years, of course, we were wearing masks, we were washing our hands. COVID proved to be quite infectious to many people, but not as deadly, not as dangerous as I think it was feared. Whereas earlier when we had SARS was less infectious, but it could make people very, very sick. So it was quite a scary thing. But basically, if it's infectious, it's kind of a living virus, and it has the ability to jump from person to person or host to host to make them sick. And so they kind of stay dangerous, or they stay infectious for longer, and they also multiply. They reproduce more rapidly. So this means that if you get some in your body, you can get sick much faster. Your body doesn't have the time to fight off the infection, and they will also survive outside in the air when people touch things and things like that. It's just the way they thrive in these cooler winter temperatures.
Yep, they multiply. We start with 1, then you got 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, etc., etc. So they multiply very quickly. And moreover, or in addition also, winter months tend to be less humid than summer months. So we're talking about the winter months, which are usually December, January, and February, and sometimes March. It's still kind of cold. So these are the winter months, and they are less humid than summer months, okay? So if you have a lot of humidity, or if it's humid, that means there's a lot of moisture or water in the air, okay? So in the summer months, I guess it's not so humid because it's hot and the water can evaporate more quickly. And in high humidity, the droplets we release when we cough or sneeze are large and fall to the floor quickly. So that's what happens when the humidity is quite high, okay? So humidity, of course, is the amount of moisture that's in the air, like relative humidity. It's expressed as a percent. When it's raining, of course, we have 100% humidity, and then you've got levels below that. And, of course, we've got these droplets that we release when we cough or when we achoo, sneeze, okay? So these things happen when we cough or sneeze. Remember to cover your mouth when you do those sorts of things. And yes, indeed, you've got those water droplets in the air, but they're in different sizes, aren't they?
Absolutely right. So when they're during the high humidity of the summertime, the droplets, those little bits of moisture, those little bits of water that leave our body through, as Roger said, when we cough or sneeze, carrying the viruses, they're large and they fall to the floor quickly. So they don't sort of float in the air. They don't travel as far. So you have to be probably closer to a sick person during the summer to catch what they have, because the air is quite wet and it doesn't allow these little droplets of disease, these little droplets carrying the virus, to travel so far. When humidity is low, however, during the drier weather of the winter, the colder winter months, the droplets are smaller and float in the air for longer. I mean, we did see this also with COVID, right? The number of people sick with COVID always went up in the wintertime, and then in the summer there'd be a bit of a dip, sort of from, June through August as the weather got warmer and warmer. And part of that is because people are spending more time inside during the winter, more time outside in the summer, but also because of this factor that humidity affects how far and how easily these droplets can travel. So the dry weather means they're smaller, they float in the air, they hang in the air, they can kind of get blown further. I think when people sneeze, the droplets can go 3 or 4 meters away from their nose if it's a very powerful sneeze and you're not covering your nose or wearing a mask or something like that. And so as a result, or because of this, or as the article says, consequently, as a consequence or as a result of this, somebody else is more likely to breathe in those particles and become sick. So even if the person isn't sitting next to you, they're standing on the other side of the room or something like that, those little particles in that drier winter air can float further and they can eventually enter someone's body and, yes, infect them, thus spreading the disease. When we say a particle of something, it's a small piece of that thing. You could think of a crumb that might fall from a piece of bread when you bite into it or when you rip it apart as a particle. We can think of atoms as being very, very, very small particles of matter. So it's just, a small thing, a small piece of something. So we're talking here about the particles, the droplets droplets of water that can leave your body, which, of course, are carrying viruses.
Right. So, of course, people tend to wear facial masks or at least surgical masks during the winter because they're afraid they might get sick if they don't do that. Although I'm not really sure if they're effective because viruses are so tiny they can easily slip through the fabric of a surgical mask. But, of course, that's controversial, so I don't want to really express my opinion on that. But, again, do take some precautions during the wintertime, which it is right now. We don't want you to get sick, of course. Now, let's move on now to the third and final paragraph for today. We'll listen first, and then we'll come right back.
Our noses contain mucus and lots of small hair-like structures called cilia. These prevent many viruses that enter our bodies from taking hold and making us ill. However, when we breathe in lots of cold air, our airways dry out, making the mucus and cilia less effective. Yet another reason the common cold seems to strike so often in winter. Okay, we are back. We're talking about how viruses love the winter. The drier weather allows them to spread further and infect more people. I don't think the viruses really care about this, but because they are natural living things, they want to reproduce. They want to continue to live and have their offspring continue to live as well. So it's the happy time the winter is for viruses. And how does this all work? We know that these little particles of moisture that you sneeze or cough out, these little particles that contain the virus that help spread it, they can travel much further in the drier, cooler air of the winter. And then what happens? So let's say a person sneezes. Once those viruses come near me and I breathe them in, what's going on? It says our noses contain mucus and lots of small hair-like structures called cilia. So this is something that's happening in our bodies. This is sort of a biological explanation. We have mucus in our noses. That's the stuff that when you blow your nose, it comes out. When you're sick, it might be kind of green or yellow or kind of a nasty color. But it's sticky, it's wet, and it actually helps to trap a lot of dust and other things that we might otherwise breathe in. We have mucus in our noses, in our mouth as well, in the form of spit and saliva, and also in our throats. It kind of stops. It's kind of like a glue trap that you might put on your floor to trap cockroaches. The mucus in your body traps little particles, viruses, bacteria, all sorts of things, dust as well, just things that we don't want in our body. So this mucus helps to stop things. And then we also have another layer of defense, lots of small hair-like structures called cilia.
Cilia, yes indeed. As you said, they're small hair-like structures. And, of course, cilium is singular and cilia is plural. So
yeah.
We have those in our ears as well. So, of course, over time, the cilia, the inner ear thing there, the little hairs get stiffer and they bend over and you start to go deaf. As you get older, you get more harder of hearing. But in any case, yes, indeed, these are in the noses and they're called cilia. And these prevent many viruses that enter our bodies from taking hold and making us ill. So if something takes hold, it actually sticks onto something and then it starts to multiply, it starts to thrive, and we don't want those viruses taking hold. Of course, they're coming into our bodies all the time, but our bodies have ways of fighting those things off, but we don't want them to take hold. We don't want them to kind of set up shop there, to sort of stick onto something and then start multiplying. We want them to go out as quickly as they came in.
So there we have our different levels of defense. That's even before white blood cells start to fight the infection in your body. This is more a physical way of stopping it with the sticky mucus and those little hair-like structures to kind of catch the viruses. However, it says, but when we breathe in lots of cold air, remember winter, cold, dry air, and our airways dry out, that mucus starts to dry out, making the mucus and cilia less effective. Yet another reason the common cold seems to strike so often in winter. Our bodies are naturally sort of warm, wet places, right? We have high body temperature and things like that. We need that moisture in our nose and our mouth. It just feels uncomfortable when your nose or mouth are all dry. Well, there's good reason for that. So when it does dry out and the air is cold and we have all these tiny little particles traveling great distances, it really weakens our defense mechanisms. So our airways dry out, meaning your nose, your mouth, your throat, the way that you breathe in and out. That's your airway, leading, of course, eventually to your lungs. but this makes the mucus in the cilia less effective. They dry out. They become less sticky and less reliable as a level of defense. So this is yet another reason. So there are several reasons we've already looked at. This is one more reason why the common cold seems to strike or seems to take hold or infect us so often in the winter time. Wow, this is really a lot of things going on here, and a lot of things, of course, we can't really do much about. I mean, you can use, I guess, a nasal spray to kind of keep your nose moist. You can wear masks and things like that, but it's just a feature of being alive in this environment with this changing weather, these changing climate conditions that can really give those diseases, those viruses, a clear advantage during the cooler, drier winter months.
Yeah, I tend to use a humidifier during the winter so the air isn't so dry in my room. I don't use it in the summer, of course, because there's plenty of humidity then. And I'm not quite sure if wearing a mask is good or bad. I've read different things about the effectiveness of surgical masks. But again, these are some of the causes as to why the common cold or viruses or whatever spread more easily in the wintertime, which again is now. So do take some precautions. Okay, we're at the end of our explanation for today. Here comes Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分提到许多病毒，包括鼻病毒和流感病毒，在寒冷的天气中茁壮成长，因为较低的气温让它们维持更长的传染性，而且更快速繁殖。文中用到 including 来表达包括，那我们来比较一下 including、included 跟 inclusive 的用法。首先 including 它是介系词，是表达包含包括，那它的用法是 including 加上名词。举例来说 Everyone including the principal enjoyed the speech. 所有的人包括校长都很喜欢那一场演讲。第二个 included 它是形容词，表示包括在内的，被包括的。那它的用法是名词加上 included。 像刚刚的例句可以改成 Everyone, the principal included, enjoyed the speech。 再来看到第三个 inclusive 是形容词，它的用法是 inclusive of 加上名词，那这是比较正式的用法。举例来说 These prices are not inclusive of tax. 这些价格不含税。另外文中它还有用到 infectious， 这是形容疾病是传染性的，也可以形容情感或态度是具有传染力的。那它的动词是 infect。 我们来补充它的字根，看到 FECT、FACT、FICT 这一类字根，它表示 do 或是 make， 就有那种做啊、制作或是产生，还有促使的意思。那么在 infect 这个字当中，字首 in 表示在点点点之中，字根 fact 表示产生。那在某个群体之中产生的影响、产生的作用，也许可以联想到 infect 是指感染、传染，也可以表达这种情感感染了别人，使他人受影响的意思。好，那么在 infect后面加上名词字尾 ion 得到了 infection， 那就会指感染、传染病。我们也补充两个有相同字根的单字，第一个是 effect， 它的字首 ef 来自EX 表示向外，字根 fact 表示产生，那合在一起表示向外产生，也就是向外产生作用啊、影响，所以 effect 这个字就有效力、影响或作用的意思。它当动词也可以表达造成使某件事发生实现。第二个补充的是 defect， D-E-F-E-C-T，那它的字首 de 表示 down away， 就有那种向下或离开的语义。字根 fact 表示制作，那同学们可以试着联想，制作出来的东西却被往下丢弃丢开了，那就表示那个东西是有缺陷有问题的，所以 defect 这个字当名词就有瑕疵缺陷的意思。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾这些单字吧。
Virus. Amanda caught a virus recently and couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. Thrive. Jeff's vegetable garden has been thriving because he waters it every day. Moreover. The hotel is quite inexpensive. Moreover, it's very close to the main train station. Humidity. Tourists visiting Bangkok in the summer should be prepared for the city's high heat and humidity levels. Consequently. Marcia forgot there was a test today and didn't study for it. Consequently, she failed it. Particle. As the forest fire burned, the wind carried tiny particles of ash through the air.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Mike.
See you next time.